The lecture hall on Thessara Prime was shaped like a bowl carved out of black stone. Rows of seats climbed upward in wide circles, and every seat was filled. 200 cadets from dozens of species sat together, talking in low voices that buzzed and clicked and hummed in languages that no single translator could catch all at once. The air smelled faintly of copper and flowers and something sharp, like ozone, because every species brought its own chemistry into the room. At the bottom of the bowl, standing behind a curved lectern made of pale metal, Professor Torvald Sekri arranged his notes with two of his four hands while the other two adjusted the holographic projector. He was Veladhi, tall, thin, covered in a hard shell the color of dark wood, with eyes like drops of black glass set into a narrow face. He had spent 40 years studying the most dangerous worlds in the known galaxy. He had written 9 books. He had never once set foot on any of the worlds he studied, and he was proud of that fact. It meant he was still alive. "Good morning," he said, and his voice carried easily through the hall's speakers. The talking stopped. "Welcome to Apex Predators of Classified Deathworlds. This lecture is mandatory for all second-year cadets. I will not repeat anything I say today, so I suggest you pay attention." He touched the projector and the air above the lectern filled with light. A planet appeared, red and swollen, wrapped in clouds the color of rust. "Malvis 9, Torvald said. "Classified as a Class 7 Deathworld. Surface gravity is 1.4 standard. The atmosphere contains traces of sulfuric acid. And this," the image shifted to show a creature that looked like a spider made of wet leather, with too many legs and a mouth that opened in 4 directions, "is the Skethara. It bleeds acid. It sees in infrared. A single adult can kill a fully armored survey team in under 30 seconds. A few cadets made sounds of discomfort. A Pelori in the third row covered 2 of her 6 eyes. Torvald moved through his slides with the calm speed of someone who had given this lecture many times. He showed them the thornmaws of Pyrrhus 3 creatures that could flatten their bodies and glide between the high-gravity storms of their homeworld, snatching prey from the air with jaws that could bite through starship hull plating. He showed them the glassworms of Dreenith, which lived inside glaciers and could survive being frozen for centuries, waiting for something warm to walk overhead. Each creature was worse than the last. Each one drew gasps, nervous laughter, and the occasional sound of someone trying not to be sick. Torvald let the reactions happen. Fear was a teaching tool. "Now," he said, and his voice dropped slightly, "we come to the main subject of today's lecture." The hologram changed. A blue and green planet appeared, wrapped in white clouds hanging in the black like a jewel. It looked peaceful. It looked beautiful. Several cadets leaned forward with interest. "This is Terra," Torvald said, "called Earth by its native species, classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, the highest classification in the Union Registry." A murmur ran through the hall. The Pelori in the third row uncovered her eyes and stared. "I see some of you are surprised," Torvald said. "It looks harmless, doesn't it? Many things on Terra look harmless. That is the first lesson Terra teaches you: appearances are meaningless." He began cycling through images. A white creature with black eyes swimming through dark water, its mouth open to show rows and rows of triangular teeth. "The great white shark," Torvald said. "An ocean predator that has existed in nearly the same form for millions of years, because evolution could not improve on it." A long, flat creature lying in muddy water, almost invisible, its eyes just above the surface. "The saltwater crocodile. It waits without moving for hours, sometimes days, and then strikes in a fraction of a second. Its bite force is the strongest of any living Terran animal." A small, almost transparent creature drifting in blue water. "The box jellyfish. Its venom can stop a heart in under 4 minutes. It has no brain." A golden-furred creature standing on a rock, its mouth open in a roar. "The lion. It hunts in coordinated groups. It can bring down animals 10 times its weight." With each image, the hall grew quieter. Torvald noticed that many cadets were no longer looking at the slides. They were looking at something else, someone else. In row 14, about halfway up the hall, a human sat among the alien cadets. She was small. Not small by human standards, perhaps, but in a room full of species that ranged from 7 to 12 feet tall, she was barely noticeable. She had dark hair pulled back from her face, brown skin, and calm dark eyes. She wore the same gray cadet uniform as everyone else. She was writing notes on a battered datapad with a cracked screen. Her name was Rena Vasquez. She was 22 years old. She was from a city on Earth called Sao Paulo, and she was the only human in the room. The cadets sitting nearest to her had shifted in their seats, not dramatically, not obviously, but there was a gap around her, a few extra inches of space on either side that had not been there at the start of the lecture. Rena noticed. She always noticed. She kept writing. Torvald displayed a new image, a pack of gray, dog-like animals running across a snowy plain, chasing a large animal with broad antlers. The Terran wolf, he said. It hunts in packs using coordinated strategy. It can run for hours without rest. It communicates through body language, sound, and scent. The footage played. The wolves ran and ran, taking turns at the front, never stopping, never slowing, while the larger animal stumbled and grew weaker. It took a long time. The alien cadets watched in growing horror. Some of them understood what they were seeing. The prey was not being overpowered. It was being exhausted. Rena watched the footage with a still, unreadable face. Something moved behind her eyes, a memory, maybe, or a feeling she had learned not to show. She said nothing. Torvald let the footage end. The hall was silent. "Every creature I have shown you today," he said slowly, "is an animal. It hunts because its biology demands it. It kills because its instincts command it. It is dangerous, yes, but it is predictable." He paused. He looked out across the rows of cadets, the Corvathi with their heavy scales, the Pelori with their many eyes, the Felici with their soft fur and nervous ears, and the one human girl sitting quietly in row 14 with her cracked datapad. "Now," Torvald said, "imagine something from a Deathworld that hunts not by instinct but by choice." The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the room. Rena's hand tightened around her stylus. Her jaw set. She did not look up. And in the seats around her, 200 alien cadets slowly began to understand what was sitting among them. Torvald let the silence hold for 10 full seconds. He had learned over 4 decades of teaching that silence was more powerful than words. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. Not gentle, careful, like a man describing the shape of something dangerous in the dark. "Humans," he said. The hologram above the lectern changed to a simple anatomical diagram. A human figure standing upright, arms at its sides. It looked plain. It looked ordinary. Compared to the acid-blooded Skethara and the jaw-crushing Thornmaws, it looked almost laughable. A Corvathi cadet in the 5th row, a big one, nearly 9 feet tall, with heavy green scales and a jaw built for crushing bone, let out a low rumble that passed for laughter among his kind. "This," he said, loud enough for the hall to hear, "this is the apex predator of a Class 12 Deathworld." A few other cadets made similar sounds, nervous amusement. The human in the diagram had no claws, no armor, no venom. Its teeth were flat and small. Its skin was soft and thin. It did not look like something that could survive a Deathworld. It looked like something a Deathworld would eat for breakfast. Torvald did not smile. Vlad could not smile. But something in the way his black eyes caught the light suggested he had been waiting for exactly this reaction. "I understand your confusion, Cadet Morek," he said to the Corvathi. "Let me correct it." He touched the projector. The anatomical diagram changed. Lines of data appeared beside the human figure, highlighting different systems in different colors. "First," Torvald said, "the skeletal and muscular system. Humans have over 600 muscles in their body. Their bones are dense, hard and capable of healing after being broken. Not slowly, as with most species, but quickly and often stronger than before. Their bodies treat damage as a blueprint for improvement. The hall was quiet now. The laughter had stopped. Second, thermoregulation. Most species in the galaxy manage heat in simple ways. They seek shade, they slow down, they stop. Humans sweat. Their bodies push water through millions of tiny openings in their skin, and as it evaporates, it cools them. This means they can remain active in temperatures that would shut down nearly every other species in this room. They can run in the midday heat of their world while every other predator around them is forced to rest. He changed the slide. Footage appeared, old footage, grainy, taken from a primitive recording device. It showed a group of humans, mostly naked, running across a flat, dry landscape under a brutal sun. They were chasing something, a large, four-legged animal with curved horns. The animal was fast, much faster than the humans. It sprinted ahead and disappeared over a ridge. But the humans did not stop. They did not slow down. They kept running, the same steady pace, the same easy rhythm. The footage jumped forward. The sun had moved across the sky. Hours had passed. The animal appeared again, stumbling now, its sides heaving, foam dripping from its mouth. The humans were still coming, still running. They were not even breathing hard. The footage jumped again. The animal had collapsed. It lay on its side, chest heaving, legs twitching. It could not run anymore. Its body had failed. The humans walked up to it calmly and knelt beside it. "This is called persistence hunting," Torvald said into the dead silence of the hall. "It is one of the oldest hunting methods on Terra. Humans do not need to be faster than their prey. They do not need to be stronger. They simply need to not stop. They follow their target for hours, sometimes an entire day, until the animal's body gives out. The prey dies not from a wound, but from exhaustion, from the simple biological fact that it cannot run as long as a human can." Nobody in the hall was moving. Nobody was laughing. The Corvathi cadet who had mocked the human diagram was gripping the armrests of his seat. Torvald continued. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Third, the human brain. Pattern recognition beyond anything we have documented in a sapient species. A human can glance at a landscape and identify a hidden predator in less than a second, faster than species with 4 times their visual acuity. They see faces in clouds. They see threats in shadows. Their brains are built to find danger in everything, and they are almost always right. He shifted the display to a medical scan, a human brain, lit up in bright colors. They also possess a chemical response called the adrenaline surge. When threatened, a human body floods itself with hormones that increase strength, speed, pain tolerance, and reaction time. There are documented cases of humans lifting objects weighing over a ton during these surges. There are cases of humans continuing to fight after losing limbs, after being shot through vital organs, after injuries that would kill most species instantly. A Galactic cadet in the second row, a soft-bodied amphibious species known for their sensitive nervous systems, stood up and walked out of the hall. Nobody blamed her. "And finally," Torvald said, "the thing that makes humans truly unique among Deathworld species." He let the pause stretch. "Pack bonding." The diagram showed a human beside a large, 4-legged Terran predator, a wolf, the same species from the earlier footage. But in this image, the wolf was sitting calmly beside the human. The human's hand rested on the wolf's head. "Humans form emotional bonds with nearly anything," Torvald said. "Other humans, animals, machines, abstract ideas. They will bond with a cleaning robot and give it a name. They will mourn a broken tool. They will die willingly and without hesitation for a creature they met an hour ago if they decide that creature is under their protection." He turned to the Corvathi cadet. "You asked why this species is classified as the apex predator of a Class 12 Deathworld, Cadet Morek. Here is your answer. Every other apex predator I showed you today, the Skethara, the Thornmaws, the Glassworms, they are all still confined to their homeworlds. Some are extinct. Some are contained. None of them ever left their planet. He pointed one long arm at the anatomical diagram of the human. Humans conquered their entire world. Then they looked up at the stars and said, that too. Every predator on Terra that ever tried to hunt humans is either dead, locked in a cage, or has learned to run. Humans are not the strongest thing on their world. They are not the fastest, but they are the thing that everything else is afraid of. And they achieved this with nothing but soft skin, a big brain, and the absolute refusal to stop. The hall sat in stunned silence. 200 cadets from 24 worlds stared at the simple diagram of a small, upright, clawless creature and felt something old and deep move in the back of their minds. Something that did not have a name in most of their languages, but that every prey animal in the galaxy would recognize instantly. In row 14, the small Felicity cadet sitting next to Rena Vasquez turned to her with wide, golden eyes. Her ears were flat against her skull. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Is that true?" the Felicity asked. "The running, your grandmother really hunts like that?" Rena looked at her. She gave a small, tired smile that did not reach her eyes. "My grandmother grew up in the Cerrado," she said quietly. "She tracked a boar for 9 hours once in 40-degree heat when she was 60 years old. She said it was a short hunt." The Felicity stared at her. Her golden eyes were very wide. She did not say anything else. She turned back to face the front of the hall, and she pressed herself very slightly into the far side of her seat, away from Rena. Rena noticed. She turned back to her notes. Her face showed nothing. But under the desk her hand was curled into a tight fist, and her knuckles had gone white. Torvald cleared his throat and adjusted the projector with his upper hands. "The next section of today's lecture," he said, "will address a question that the Union Diplomatic Corps has been debating since first contact with humanity 30 years ago. What happens when a Deathworld predator, with all the biological tools I have just described, develops culture, emotion, morality? What happens when the thing that cannot be stopped also learns to think?" He pulled up a new file on his display. It was marked with a security classification that most cadets had never seen before: amber level, restricted access. Torvald's expression shifted. For the first time in the lecture, he looked uncomfortable. "What I am about to show you," he said, "is from a first contact incident that the Diplomatic Corps would prefer you never see. It has been partially declassified for educational purposes. I ask that you watch it in full before reacting." In row 14, Rena Vasquez stopped writing. Her stylus hovered above the cracked screen of her datapad. She was staring at the classification code on the holographic display. Her face had gone pale. She recognized it. She knew exactly what he was about to show them. And for the first time since the lecture began, the small, quiet human in the gray uniform looked afraid. The holographic display flickered and changed. The beautiful blue planet and the anatomical diagrams disappeared. In their place was something colder, a gray, industrial space station hanging against a field of distant stars. It looked old. It looked tired. The kind of place built for function, not comfort. "Corvallis Station," Torvald said. "A Union trading outpost on the edge of contested space. 6 years ago, it was home to roughly 400 permanent residents and an equal number of transient traders, diplomats, and travelers. It had a small Union security detachment, 12 officers, lightly armed. The station was considered low risk." He paused. Something in the way his mandibles shifted told the cadets that the word low risk had not aged well. On the 17th day of the 4th cycle, a Drexhari raider fleet dropped out of subspace within weapons range of the station. 3 ships, approximately 80 armed combatants. A new image appeared: a Drexhari. The cadets who had not seen one before flinched. It was tall, broad, built like something designed to break through walls. Its skin was thick and mottled gray, like stone. Its eyes were large and pale, adapted to the bright, constant light of its binary star homeworld. Its hands ended in blunt, heavy fingers capable of crushing metal. The Drexhari are a slaver species, Torvund said flatly. They operate outside Union law. They attacked Corvallis's station for hostages. They overwhelmed the security team in 9 minutes, sealed the station's communication array, and herded approximately 200 civilians into the main cargo bay. The hologram shifted to a recreation of the cargo bay, a large, dim room filled with huddled figures of various species. Pelori, Felici, the Lashans, Corvathi, and others, all pressed together, surrounded by armed Drexhari guards. The raiders made a demand to the Union, payment of 40 million standard credits within 12 hours, or they would begin killing hostages, 1 per hour. Torvund's voice was steady, clinical. He was a scientist. He dealt in facts, but even facts could carry weight, and the hall felt heavy now. The Union's nearest response fleet was 14 hours away. Negotiations began immediately, but the Drexhari were not interested in talking. After the first hour passed with no payment, they selected a hostage at random, an elderly Pelori merchant, and executed him in front of the others. Silence, absolute silence. After the second hour, they selected another. The hostages realized that the pattern would continue. Panic set in. Several attempted to resist and were beaten severely. The Drexhari guards maintained control through overwhelming force and fear. Torvund touched the projector. A new image appeared, a still frame from a security camera. It showed a corner of the cargo bay, dimly lit. Among the huddled hostages, barely visible, was a small figure, a human, young, very young. Among the hostages, Torvund said, was a 14-year-old human girl. She was present on Corvallis's station because her parents were Union trade negotiators assigned to the outpost. Her parents were in a different section of the station when the attack began. They were unable to reach her. The still frame zoomed in. The girl was sitting against a wall, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was small even by human standards, thin, dark-haired, with wide eyes that caught the dim light. She looked exactly like what she was, a frightened child. For the first 3 hours, Torvund said, the girl did nothing. She sat against the wall and watched. She did not cry. She did not speak. Several other hostages later reported that they forgot she was there. He let that detail sit for a moment. Then he continued. At the beginning of the 4th hour, the Drexhari guards began selecting the next hostage. They moved through the crowd and chose a Felici child, 6 years old. In the lecture hall, a sound moved through the cadets, not a word, not a gasp, but something lower and more instinctive, a shared flinch. The Felici child was screaming, Torvund said. Her mother was restrained by 2 guards. The child was dragged toward the center of the bay where the previous executions had taken place. He paused, his 4 hands were still. "This is the point," he said quietly, at which the human girl moved. The hologram switched to a security camera reconstruction, partially redacted, grainy but clear enough. It showed the cargo bay from above. The small human figure stood up from the wall and began walking toward the guards, not running, walking, steady and calm. Several hostages tried to grab her to pull her back. She shook them off without looking at them. What happened next took approximately 4 minutes, Torvund said. I will describe it based on the official after-action report, supplemented by hostage testimony. He took a breath, an unusual gesture for a Veladhi, who did not need to breathe for emotional regulation. The girl approached the nearest guard from behind. When the guard turned, she dropped low, below the angle his weapon could track, and struck him in what humans call the knee joint with a broken piece of a lighting fixture she had pulled from the wall during the preceding hours. The guard fell. She took his sidearm. The hall was frozen. She did not use the weapon to shoot. Drexhari sidearms require a grip strength and hand size that a human child does not possess. Instead, she used it as a blunt instrument to strike the second guard in the cluster of nerve endings at the base of the Drexhari skull, a vulnerability she could not possibly have known about through training. Later analysis suggested she simply aimed for the spot that looked softest. Torvund's voice was very level, the kind of level that takes effort. When a third guard grabbed her, she dislocated her own thumb to slip free of his grip. She then retreated into a maintenance shaft along the cargo bay wall, a space too narrow for any Drexhari to follow. From inside the shaft, she accessed the cargo bay's power relay and severed the main lighting conduit. He let that sink in. The cargo bay went dark, completely dark, and this is where the biological reality of Terra becomes relevant. Drexhari evolved under two suns. Their homeworld has no true night. Their eyes are adapted for constant, bright light. In total darkness, they are effectively blind. He looked out at the cadets. Humans are not. Human eyes adjust to darkness in minutes. They cannot see perfectly, but they can see shapes, movement, and outlines. In a dark room, a human has every advantage. The reconstruction showed the cargo bay in infrared, the only way the security cameras could capture what happened next. Bright shapes of hostages huddled together. The larger, hotter shapes of Drexhari guards stumbling, swinging their weapons at nothing, firing blindly into walls and ceiling. And one small shape, moving fast and low through the dark, weaving between bodies with a certainty that looked almost supernatural. Over the next 6 minutes, Torvund said, the girl freed 11 hostages from their restraints and guided them to a sealed maintenance compartment at the back of the bay. She moved in complete silence. The Drexhari could not find her. They could hear her. Humans are not perfectly silent, but every time they moved toward the sound, she was already gone. The reconstruction showed a Drexhari guard cornering the small shape against a wall. The shape did not retreat. It lunged forward. The infrared footage showed a brief, violent struggle, and then the guard collapsed. When one guard cornered her, Torvund said, and now his voice was very quiet, she bit through the soft tissue of his lower arm to break his grip. She then struck his throat with a fire suppression canister she had taken from the wall. He died within seconds. Nobody in the lecture hall was breathing. Torvund stopped the reconstruction. The hologram froze on the image of the cargo bay in darkness, the still shapes of unconscious guards, the cluster of freed hostages in the maintenance room, and one small figure standing alone in the middle of the bay, holding a metal canister, breathing hard. She was 14 years old, Torvund said. She had no military training, no genetic modification, no combat augmentation, no weapons beyond what she found on the floor. She was a child from a Deathworld, and when she was cornered, 60 million years of evolution spoke through her. The hall was so quiet that Rena could hear the heartbeat of the Felicity cadet sitting next to her. Fast, very fast. A Velashian cadet in the front row raised a trembling hand. His voice was barely a whisper. "Professor, what happened to the girl after the rescue?" Torvund did not answer immediately. He looked down at his lectern display. His 4 hands went very still. He read something on the screen, a name, a file number, an enrollment record, and for the first time in 40 years of teaching, his composure cracked. His mandibles parted slightly. His black eyes moved from the screen to the rows of cadets, searching, climbing, row by row, until they stopped on row 14. Every cadet in the hall followed his gaze. 200 heads turned. 200 pairs of eyes, some with 2, some with 6, some with compound lenses that saw in spectrums humans could not imagine, all focused on the same person. Rena Vasquez sat in her seat. She did not move. She did not flinch. She met Torvund's gaze with steady, dark eyes that held something old and heavy and tired. The silence was enormous. Rena spoke. Her voice was quiet, calm, and carried through the hall with a clarity that needed no amplifier. "I was 15, actually," she said. "You got my age wrong." The hall erupted. Cadets scrambled in their seats. The Korvathi cadet gripped the edges of his desk so hard that the metal groaned. The Felicity beside Rena pressed both hands over her mouth. Somewhere in the back rows, someone made a sound that might have been a scream or might have been a prayer. And Torvald Sekri, who had spent 40 years studying the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy from the safety of orbital platforms, stood at his lectern and stared at the small, quiet girl in row 14. And for the first time in his long career, he had absolutely nothing to say. The noise in the hall took nearly a full minute to die down. Torvald did not try to quiet it. He stood at the lectern with his 4 arms folded, his black eyes still fixed on Rena, and he waited. Around the hall, cadets whispered, shifted, stared. Some looked at Rena with fear, some with awe. A few would not look at her at all. When the silence finally returned, it was a different kind of silence than before. Before, the cadets had been afraid of an idea, the concept of a Deathworld predator that could think. Now they were afraid of a person. A specific person, sitting 12 rows up, who weighed less than half of most of them and had killed a Drexhari raider with a fire canister when she was 15 years old. Torvald spoke carefully, "Cadet Vasquez." Rena looked at him. Her face was unreadable. "I owe you an apology," Torvald said. "I did not review the full personnel files of my students before this lecture. I should have. If you wish to leave, you may do so. I will not ask anything of you that you are not willing to give." Rena sat still for a long moment. Then she looked around the hall at 200 faces turned toward her, at the fear and curiosity and something else she could not name, and she made a decision. She closed her datapad. She stood up, and she walked down the steps toward the lectern. The hall watched her descend. She was not tall. She was not imposing. She moved the way she always moved, quiet, steady, controlled. But now every cadet in the room could see something they had not seen before. The way she placed her feet. The way her eyes swept the room without moving her head. The way she was aware, at every moment, of every exit and every person and every object within reach. She had always moved like this. They had just never known what they were looking at. Rena reached the lectern and stood beside Torvald. He stepped back to give her space. She looked out at the rows of faces and took a slow breath. "I'm not good at talking," she said. Her voice was steady but not loud. "So I'll just say what's true, and then you can ask questions if you want." She gripped the edge of the lectern with both hands. "The professor's file is mostly right, but it makes it sound like I don't know, like some kind of soldier, like I had a plan, like I knew what I was doing." She shook her head. "I didn't. I was terrified. I was so scared I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't think straight. Everything in the file that sounds strategic, the power relay, the maintenance shaft, moving in the dark, none of that was strategy. It was panic." She paused. The hall was perfectly still. "I cut the power because my dad showed me the maintenance panels on a tour of the station when we first arrived. He thought it was boring. I thought it was boring. But when everything went wrong, it was the only thing I could think of. My brain grabbed the one useful memory it had and held on." She looked down at her hands on the lectern. "The maintenance shaft, I went in there because I was running. That's it. I was running away, and it was the only opening small enough that they couldn't follow. I didn't choose it. I fell into it." A Pelori cadet raised a hand tentatively. "The guard the one you killed. The file said you targeted a nerve cluster at the base of the skull. How did you know where to hit?" Rena stared at him for a moment. "I didn't," she said. "I hit him in the head with the heaviest thing I could find. I hit him as hard as I could, and I kept hitting him until he stopped moving. There was no targeting. There was no technique. I didn't stop." The words hung in the air. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably. They had heard Torvald describe persistence just an hour ago, the human inability to stop. They had heard it as a lecture about endurance hunting. Now they heard it again, and it sounded different. "The file says I freed 11 hostages," Rena continued. "That's true. But it doesn't say that I was crying the entire time. It doesn't say that I threw up after the guard died. It doesn't say that my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't undo the restraints on the first hostage and had to use my teeth. She stopped. She was quiet for several seconds. The cadets waited. There's something the file doesn't include at all, she said. Her voice had changed. It was lower now, rougher. After the Union fleet arrived and the Drexhari were captured, the hostages were evacuated to a medical ship. The families were reunited. A lot of crying, a lot of relief. She swallowed. The Felicity child, the one they were going to kill, the one I went in for, her mother brought her to see me, to thank me. The little girl was maybe 6 years old. She had these big golden eyes. Her mother put her down in front of me and said, "This is the one who saved you. Say thank you." Rena's jaw tightened. Her eyes were bright and she blinked hard. The little girl looked at me and screamed. She screamed and grabbed her mother and hid behind her legs and would not look at me. She was shaking, crying. The hall was airless. Because she had been in the cargo bay when the lights went out, and she had heard everything. She heard me fighting. She heard the guard. She heard sounds that a 6-year-old should never have to hear, and in the dark she didn't know what was making those sounds. She just knew that something was out there, moving in the black, and it was violent and fast, and it would not stop. Rena's voice cracked, and she pressed her lips together hard until she had control again. When she finally saw me, when she saw that the thing in the dark was just a girl, a human girl, it didn't help. Because now she knew what humans sounded like when they stopped pretending to be safe. And it was the worst thing she had ever heard. Worse than the Drexhari, worse than the guns, because the Drexhari were big and loud and obvious. But I was quiet, I was fast, and I came out of the dark. She looked up at the hall. Her eyes were steady, but there were tears on her face. "That's what your file doesn't say, Professor. It doesn't say that the little girl I saved was more afraid of me than the people who were going to kill her." The silence that followed was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of 200 people who did not know what to feel. Rena wiped her face with the back of her hand. She straightened, and when she spoke again, her voice was clear. "You teach these cadets that humans are Deathworld predators. And you're right. Everything you said about our biology is true. The persistence, the adrenaline, the pack bonding, all of it. But you talk about it like it's a gift, like it's something we should be proud of." She shook her head slowly. "It's not a gift, it's a scar. Every human you will ever meet is carrying 60 million years of violence written into their blood and bones. We feel it every day. When someone startles us and our first instinct is to strike. When we see something small and helpless and part of our brain calculates how easy it would be to take it. When we get angry and something ancient and dark rises up inside us and says, 'You could end this. You're built for it.'" She looked at Torvan. The old professor stood motionless. "Most of us spend our entire lives fighting that voice," Rena said. "That's what it means to be human. Not the running, not the hunting, the fighting against what we are. Every act of kindness a human has ever committed is an act of defiance against our own biology. Every time we choose to be gentle, we are choosing to be something our evolution never intended." She turned back to the cadets. "I didn't come to this academy because I'm a predator. I came here because I want to protect people, and I want to do it without becoming the thing that little girl was afraid of." She stood in silence. 200 cadets stared at her. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then from the midrows, the small Felicity cadet who had been sitting next to Rena all morning stood up. Her fur was standing on end. Her ears were flat. Her golden eyes were full of tears. Her whole body was trembling. She walked down the steps, slowly, one at a time. Every eye in the hall followed her. She reached the front, stood in front of Rena and looked up at her. Then the Felicity wrapped her arms around Rena and held on tight. Rena froze, every muscle in her body locked. For one terrible second the cadets could see it, the flinch, the coiled readiness, the Deathworld instinct that screamed at her to react to something suddenly touching her. And then she let it go. She closed her eyes. She put her arms around the small, trembling Felicity and held her gently, so gently, as if she were holding the most fragile thing in the universe, and she would rather die than break it. In the fifth row, the Corvathi cadet, the big one, the one who had laughed, rose to his feet. He did not speak. He placed one heavy, scaled hand over his chest in the Corvathi gesture of deepest respect. He stood at attention, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the small human at the lectern. One by one, the other cadets stood. Pelori, the Lashans, species Rena did not know the names of. They rose in silence, in respect, and they looked at her not with fear but with something new, something that had no name in most of their languages. Torvald watched it happen. He stood to the side, his 4 hands hanging at his sides, and he looked at his slides. 40 years of research, thousands of data points, careful classifications of predators and prey, and he felt the ground shift beneath everything he thought he knew. He had spent his whole life studying what humans were. He had never once thought to ask what they were trying to become. 3 weeks passed. Thesara Prime continued its slow orbit around a yellow star that was not Earth's sun, but looked enough like it to make Rena pause at the viewport sometimes. The Academy's corridors hummed with the usual sounds: boots on metal, translator chatter, the distant thrum of the station's gravity generators holding everything in place. Life went on. Lectures were attended. Exams were prepared for. The cafeteria still served food that no species was fully satisfied with. But something had changed. It was small, and most people could not have pointed to it if asked, but it was there. The gap that had always existed around Rena Vasquez, the extra inches of empty space that followed her through hallways and dining halls, had closed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but day by day the distance shrank. It started with the Felicity cadet. Her name was Leon. She had begun sitting next to Rena in every class they shared, pressing close enough that their shoulders touched. The first time it happened, Rena flinched so hard that Leon nearly fell off the bench. The second time, Rena held still and said nothing. The third time, she let out a long, slow breath and relaxed, and Leon's ears perked up, and that was the end of the distance between them. Others followed. The Pelori from the third row started saving Rena a seat in the navigation lab. A group of the Lashan cadets invited her to their study circle, and when she showed up looking uncertain, simply handed her a cup of something warm and moved on with the lesson. The Corvathi cadet, Marek, the big one who had laughed at the anatomical diagram, stopped Rena in a corridor one morning, stood at full attention and said, in his deep, grinding voice, "I was wrong about your species, Cadet Vasquez. I will not be wrong again." Then he walked away before she could respond. Rena did not know what to do with any of this. She had spent 3 years at the academy being politely avoided. She had made peace with it. She understood it. She was a Deathworld predator in a station full of people whose ancestors had been prey, and the biological math was simple. They were afraid of her because they should be. She had accepted that the best she could hope for was professional respect at a distance. Now the distance was gone, and she did not know how to stand without it. She spent more time at the viewports. She ran laps on the station's exercise ring in the early hours when no one else was awake, pushing herself until her lungs burned and her legs shook, because the running always helped. It was the oldest thing inside her, the need to move, to cover ground, to chase the horizon, and when she ran, the noise in her head went quiet. Leon found her there one morning, walking her cool-down laps in the dim half-light of the ring's artificial dawn. The Felicity fell into step beside her without asking, her shorter legs working twice as fast to keep pace. They walked in silence for a while. Leon's tail swished behind her, keeping rhythm. "You don't sleep well," Leon said. It was not a question. Rena shrugged. "Humans don't need as much sleep as most species." "That's not what I said." Rena looked at her. Leon's golden eyes were steady. For a small, soft creature from a world with no major predators, she had a stubbornness that Rena was learning not to underestimate. "No," Rena said after a while, "I don't sleep well." Leon nodded. She did not ask why. She did not offer advice. She just walked beside Rena in the half-light, close enough that Rena could feel the warmth of her fur, and said nothing. It was, Rena thought, the kindest thing anyone had done for her in a very long time. In his private office, Tor von Sekri was writing. He had been writing for 3 weeks, and his desk was buried under layers of discarded drafts and data crystals. His 4 hands moved across the keyboard in pairs, 2 typing while 2 reviewed notes, and his black eyes were bright with something that his colleagues, if they could have seen him, would not have recognized. It was not academic curiosity. It was not professional focus. It was the frantic, electric energy of a man who had just realized that his life's work was incomplete. The paper was titled, "A Proposal for the Reclassification of Homo sapiens, from Deathworld Apex Species to Transcendence Class Sapient." It was, by any academic standard, a radical document. The classification system for sapient species had not been revised in over 2 centuries. Every species in the Union was categorized by its world of origin, Deathworld, Garden World, Ocean World, and by its biological role in its home ecosystem. Humans were listed as Deathworld Apex, the same category as the Drexhari Raiders and 24 other species that had clawed their way to sapience through violence and predation. Torvon was arguing that this was wrong, not because the biological data was inaccurate, every fact in his lecture remained true, but because the classification measured only where a species had come from. It said nothing about where they were going. Wrote, "The human species exhibits a phenomenon unprecedented in Union biological records, the conscious, cultural, and systematic suppression of its own predatory instincts. Unlike other Deathworld sapients, which have channeled their biological imperatives into social hierarchies, conquest, or ritual combat, humans have developed philosophical, ethical, and legal frameworks specifically designed to counteract their evolutionary programming. They do not merely control their violence. They actively choose, generation after generation, to be less violent than their biology demands. This is not suppression through weakness. It is suppression through will." He stared at the paragraph. He thought about the girl standing at his lectern, crying and steady at the same time, telling 200 cadets that every act of human kindness was a rebellion against nature. He kept writing. The paper was submitted to the Union Xenobiology Council on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it had been rejected by 3 senior reviewers who called it sentimental, methodologically unsound, and dangerously naive. By the following Monday, it had been downloaded 11,000 times from the academic preprint server and was being discussed in every xenobiology department in the Union. By the end of the month, the Union Military Advisory Board had requested a copy. Their note was brief. "We have served alongside humans. Your conclusions match our observations. We would like to discuss further." The year-end assembly was held in the same hall where Torvon had given his lecture. The same seats, the same black stone walls, the same holographic projector at the center. But the room felt different now, in ways that had nothing to do with the architecture. Torvon stood at the lectern for the last time that academic year. He looked out at the graduating cadets, the same faces mostly, that had sat in this hall 3 weeks ago and learned what a human was. "I have taught this lecture for 40 years, he said. "Every year I show cadets the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. I show them the teeth, the claws, the venom, the things that will kill them if they are not careful. My job is to make you afraid because fear keeps you alive." He paused. "This year, one of you taught me something I should have learned a long time ago." He looked at Rena. She was sitting in her usual spot in row 14. Leon was beside her, pressed close. On Rena's other side, Marek sat with his arms folded, looking like a scaled mountain that had decided to personally guard the small human next to him. Several other cadets had filled in the nearby seats. Row 14 was full. "She taught me that the most dangerous thing in this galaxy is not a Deathworld predator," Torvon said. "It is a Deathworld predator that has chosen to be kind, because that choice is not made from weakness. It is made against every instinct, every chemical signal, every ancient voice in the blood that says, you are built for violence. To choose kindness in spite of that, to choose it every single day, knowing what you are capable of, that is not softness. That is the strongest thing I have ever seen. He let the word settle. Humanity's greatest weapon was never their endurance. It was never their persistence or their adrenaline. It was their ability to look at the violence written into their own nature and say, no, I will be something better. And then to wake up the next morning and say it again, and again, for 10,000 generations. He closed his notes. Go out into the galaxy, cadets. You will encounter many dangerous things, but if you are very lucky, you will serve alongside a human. And if you do, you will see what I saw this year, that the beings we should admire most are not the ones who were born gentle. They are the ones who were born with claws and chose, every single day, to open their hands instead. The hall rose, not in the scattered, uncertain way they had risen 3 weeks ago. This time, they rose together, all of them, in a single wave that filled the bowl-shaped room with the sound of 200 beings standing at once. Rena stayed in her seat for a moment. Her eyes were bright. Lian was squeezing her hand hard enough to hurt, and Rena let her, because the small pain was grounding and real, and it reminded her that she was here, in this place, among people who were no longer afraid of her. Or perhaps they were still afraid. Perhaps they would always be a little afraid. But they had chosen to stand beside her anyway, and that, Rena thought, was what courage looked like for people who were not born on Deathworlds. After the assembly, the corridors were loud with celebration. End-of-year energy. Cadets heading to shuttles, heading to bars, heading to viewports to watch the stars and feel the largeness of the galaxy they were about to enter. Rena walked alone for a while, then not alone, because Lian appeared at her side as she always did now, without announcement, without invitation, as if she had simply decided that this was where she belonged and no force in the universe was going to argue with her. They walked through the quieter sections of the station, past labs and storage rooms and the long, curving viewport corridor that looked out over the star field. The light was dim here, just the stars and the faint glow of the station's running lights, and it was peaceful in the way that only empty spaces can be. Lian stopped at the viewport. She looked out at the stars. Her reflection was faint in the glass, a small, furred face with golden eyes and ears that twitched at every distant sound. "Rena," she said. "Yeah." Lian was quiet for a moment. She seemed to be choosing her words, which was unusual for someone who normally said whatever came into her head at whatever volume felt appropriate. "I'm glad your species made it to the stars," she said. Rena looked at her. The small Felicie was still gazing out at the viewport, her expression calm and certain, and there was nothing in her voice that suggested she was saying it to be kind or polite. She was saying it because she meant it. Because she had sat next to a Deathworld predator for an entire year and watched her take careful notes and eat bad cafeteria food and flinch at unexpected contact and run laps in the dark because the nightmares wouldn't let her sleep. And she had decided, with the quiet, absolute certainty of a prey species that had chosen to stop running, that this was a person worth standing beside. Rena smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind that started uncertain and then grew, and for the first time in a very long time it reached her eyes. "Yeah," she said softly, looking out at the stars. "Me too." They stood together at the viewport for a long time, the human and the Felicie, watching the light of 100 billion suns stretch out before them like a road without end. Behind them, the station hummed. Ahead of them, the galaxy waited. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the universe, vast, ancient, and full of teeth, looked at the small, soft, impossibly dangerous creature standing at the glass and felt something it had not felt in a very long time. It felt hope.